It's a campaign that we did called One Damn Day, where we did that for 24 hours, and that's in the heart of Amsterdam, and we had 800 activists.
That book doesn't advocate for veganism; it advocates for vegetarianism, and it was radical. It was a radical push forward at the time, and is responsible for most of the animal rights movements for today. Do you see vegetarians as allies, or do you see them as like a step in the wrong direction?
Yeah, the latter. People will say they're against animal cruelty, but then when they see us, they're like, oh, actually, I'm responsible for what they're showing, which is the worst form of animal cruelty that you can even imagine. What could you imagine doing worse to an animal than what we're showing you on our screens?
Well, welcome everyone to the Deep Drinks podcast, where the drinks are deep and the conversation's deeper. My name is Dave, and today we have Paul Bashir, who is the co-founder, who's a vegan activist and the co-founder of Anonymous for the Voiceless, which is a non-for-profit animal rights organization specializing in using conversation and animal agricultural footage to inform the public about the food industry's animal exploitation. I met Paul in Brisbane, where some of the volunteers were showing footage of factory farms and common practices in Australia. And then when people would stop, they would simply ask them, "How does the footage make you feel?" And I thought that was a really interesting way to engage with animal ethics. Paul is a certified plant-based nutritionist through the C. Collins Campbell Centre of Nutrition Studies. And Paul has made it his life's mission to fight against animal torture and abuse, which he sees as the biggest injustice in the world. He credits the movie Earthlings and fellow animal rights activist Gary Yufsky, sorry, I might have got that wrong, as major influences in his activism. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, David.
It's and Paul, well, first of all, you rubbed me the right way straight away, because in our correspondence, you suggest you knew exactly what you wanted. I said, "What drink are you going to be drinking, Paul?" And you said an ice cold, and then whatever this is called, a Winhin Stefanava.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I don't know how to say it, but
this one here,
it's a long word.
Yeah, and that's what we're drinking today.
Yeah.
While we discuss animal ethics. So normally what we do is we normally go into a bit of a backstory about where how you came to have the beliefs that you have, or hold the ideologies that you have. But I thought instead we'll jump straight into the reasons for why veganism, essentially. But first, before we get into that, so pre-introduction, how long have you been a vegan for?
9 years, approaching 10.
Okay, cool. All right. And was it Earthlings mainly that you first saw Earthlings and then it kind of got you thinking about what our relationship with animals and how we use them?
The first documentary I ever saw that connected me to what is happening in animal farming is Food Co.
Okay.
And then I saw Earthlings some months after that, and then I watched Gary Yourofsky's speech in Georgia, speaking to university students at Georgia Tech, and yeah, it's a viral video, and that really cemented my understanding on what veganism is, and that's when I realized that I was 100% in alignment with what it actually means versus what society thinks it means.
Yeah. So it's actually really interesting because a lot of people know vegans for going in, when I say the public, I mean random people who aren't vegans, carnivores or omnivores or whatever. They will see vegans in a negative light because they're usually portrayed in a negative light. There's that old joke, how do you know someone's vegan? They'll tell you. Or it's the same thing for atheists, or you see footage of people going into restaurants and saying meat is murder and screaming, and that's generally the most people have with interaction most people have with veganism.
Yeah.
But for you and for the anonymous for the voiceless, I see that you literally go out in the street and you literally put the reality of what people's food choices are just out there. And this
Yeah.
isn't insanely, well, it is insanely graphic, but it's not like you're cherry picking. Well, from what I could tell, you're not cherry picking like the worst of the worst of the worst, where there's like some mass murderer just running around a farm killing animals for fun. You're just showing the current industry practices. And that's correct, right? Like you're not
100%. Yeah. And we're not showing footage that, like you said, is like the most gratuitous, most insane acts of cruelty in those industries. It's only what we were able to record. So if we're showing it on our screens and it looks bad, then it's most likely a lot worse on actual farms, because that was only what we were able to get. Right? It's
right.
not, these facilities aren't surveilled 24 hours a day and then that footage is released to the public for everyone to witness. And if it was, and people were watching that footage every day, then you would most likely see a lot worse going on than what we show. But even if we were to show just the worst case scenarios, we would still have a good point, because like this is
Yeah.
what people are responsible for, right?
Yeah.
But really what we're showing is just the absolute standard practices that go on. And it's not to say that the treatment needs to change. It's to say that this entire industry needs to have its funeral once and for all.
See, so straight away, if I'm trying to be is empathetic to someone who maybe hasn't considered these arguments before, and straight away I can see the cognitive dissonance starting to creep up in my imagined mind, right? And
Okay, let's get into it.
well, I think that what happens is immediately people get hit with excuses or whatever, right? But what I want to kind of drive home is the point that if you agree in any way that the treatment of that there should be any like level of respect for animals, or like that, we shouldn't be able to just like skin cats for fun, or drown puppies for fun. If you think that's immoral on some level, then you probably will have a problem with what's happening in even the nicest farms in the world. So I just want to encourage people that if you are watching this and you're immediately thinking, oh, here we go, a big like circle jerk of like information, I just want you to kind of listen to the arguments, and then at the end of this conversation, we will be going through some basic like objections that people have, and answering some of your questions too. So, but first, I want you to just tell us, and I only know a little bit about it, but I want you to tell us the birth, life, and death of a standard pig, cow, or chicken or sheep in an average farm. And does it differ from like Europe to Australia to Canada to America? So
It's
maybe we can start with
roughly the
pigs.
same. Sure, pigs.
Okay.
Okay, sure. But to answer your question, it's roughly the same thing. Obviously, there are some very minuscule amounts of farms out there that farm pigs in a free range. They call it free range, which is a real bastardization of the English language. But they're out in fields versus being in factory farms. But by far and large, 99% of the pigs that people eat come from factory farms. So from birth, these piglets are born from mothers who are laying in what they call sow crates. And these sow crates are about the size of their body. So they cannot turn around. The mothers cannot. They can't do anything other than standing up and lying back down. That's literally their lives, their entire lives.
No,
The
wait, their entire lives, not just like when they're giving birth or whatever. Is it their entire lives?
Well, they are supposed to also be there for their piglets during the after they've been born. So they're there for quite a long time. I actually don't know. You're asking me a good question right now because I actually don't know the time period in which they spend in sow crates. I know that they only live a fraction of their lifespans.
Okay.
So, like, for example, cows live up until age 20. The oldest recorded living cow, I think, was 28. And maybe even older than that. I haven't looked at this for a while now, but they are murdered within 4 years, 5 years maximum of their lifespan. And it's the same with pigs. They're killed at a very, very, very young age. So it's likely that most, if not all, of their lives, once they are in motherhood or at the age when they deem them able to give birth, then they'll spend the majority of their time in those sow crates.
And
So
how much of ham, bacon, pork comes from those? Like how much of the stuff that people eat comes from that type of farming?
99% of it.
Right. Okay. Okay, so let's say someone's a really ethical. They never go to any fast food. They never go to any restaurants, and they buy their pigs from the nicest. Let's say the nicest free range farm. The pigs go getting their belly rubbed every day and stuff. What's the death like for that pig?
A lot of people, and I know that you're not doing this, I'd just like to touch on this really quick and then I'll answer your question. A lot of people that we speak to on the streets, they focus almost entirely on how it's done. Mm-hmm. And they think that there's a better way to do it. But then when you simply describe the way that it's done or show it, no one in there, or like, if they're being intellectually honest, right? No one in their right mind thinks that what is happening is acceptable. And of course, the only thing you need to do in order to conclude whether it's acceptable or not is imagine it happening to you. Mm. And none of it is acceptable. But for context sake, to answer your question, most pigs in this country and in the UK are killed in gas chambers. So the vast majority of them are killed in gas chambers, which is where they're lowered in these gondolas into a gas chamber. And they load several pigs into these gas chambers at a time. And they are exposed to toxic gases that burn them from the inside out because these gases attach to any amount of moisture that they have in their bodies, so mucus or anything like that, and it attaches to that and then burns from the inside out. So these pigs die thrashing and fighting for their lives, screaming at a pig scream is extremely harrowing, and they die a horrific death. They are clearly in pain. Clearly they are suffering until the bitter end. When I first learned this, it really baffled me that humans will then eat the flesh of an animal that's gone through that. Because first of all, I just didn't understand how that does not affect the flesh, right? If you're just purely thinking about this from a quality point of view, quality of meat point of view, but then also because you're consuming suffering if you choose to do that. Like, you're literally consuming a tortured soul, a tortured animal. But yeah, that's how most pigs are killed. Now, in the other cases where they're not killed that way, they are usually electrically prodded or stunned, both of which does not kill the animal. It renders their limbs useless. They become docile and easier to control. And then they are stabbed in the throat and hung upside down to bleed out. And a lot of people have to say, well, halal is worse. Well, actually, is almost identical to the way that it's done in Western farms. But anyway,
I'm sure that if you were to ask a pig which way it would like to die, if it could communicate that, it probably would choose to live. It probably wouldn't want to die in any case, even if it was dying in their sleep. It probably has a will to live, right? So like
exactly, and that's of course, right? And this is this is like a good segue for those who love to say, well, they should be treated right throughout their lives, and they shouldn't be in factory farms. Most non-vegans disagree with factory farming, Joe Rogan being the most popular. However, and most people who say that actually still continue to support factory farming and seem to do it unfazed. However, even in the small scale farming where you give them better quality of life, you then have built more value in life for that animal. So, and then you want to take that life away from them in an animal's life where they have built up more value than a factory farmed animal would have for their lives. So it's even more cruel to go about it that way. And that's why there is no solution to this if you focus on how to do it. There is no good way to do something that's inherently evil. Murder is evil, and there's no nice way to do it.
I'm going to segue into a bizarre question. Do you, if there was a farm that existed that raised animals in the best possible way you could think of, so think of like an animal refuge or something, right? Like or a rescue farm, and they waited for the animal to die of natural causes. They gave them the best medical examinations throughout their whole life, and when it died of natural causes, they took the flesh and ate the flesh. Would you have any ethical problem? I mean, there's nutritional problems. Would you have any ethical problems with that?
So I obviously have a direct answer to this, but rather than just saying yes or no, can I just also ask if this is in replacement of the situation we have now? Like if we lived in a world where that's what people were doing to animals when they eat animals, in replacement of what's happening now, then of course I'd opt for that, 100%. But the thing is, there isn't a single that I know of or have even heard of, and I'm sure I would have heard of it by now. A farm like this doesn't exist. A sanctuary. It just doesn't exist.
Of
but
course.
Yeah, it is technically a loophole.
Could you? Or we could even rephrase it. Let's say when you retire, you decide to run a refuge, and an animal passes away. Instead of burying that animal, and losing that that flesh, would you then maybe take some of that meat, feed it to yourself? If you probably wouldn't want to, or would you have any ethical problems with feeding it to your other, to yourself or to anyone? Would you have any ethical problems with doing that?
Yeah, I would. I personally would, because first of all, it's unnecessary. If it was necessary, then maybe I would think about it, but it's unnecessary. Second of all, I don't think that is a respectful way of honoring an animal that, assuming in that condition, you have built a bond with and you've looked after them. And I don't see that as anything but insane, quite frankly, to just eat someone that you've been looking after for so long. You wouldn't do that in any other context with humans, of course. So not that I necessarily view non-human animals as human, but basic values when it comes to morality, like basic rights, I think ought to be respected, like the rights to at least not have your body eaten by someone else, right? If it doesn't need to be eaten by someone else. And lastly, which is just a caveat, I don't think that eating an old being who's died of old age is going to be very, I just, like most people, this is why people don't do it, I think. Like their flesh would be really hard to eat, probably hard to digest. And it makes my stomach turn even thinking about it. And so, no, I personally would have an ethical issue mainly, but as a caveat, I don't even think that it would be biologically satisfying in any type
Yeah,
of
of
way.
course. Of course, but I mean, well, you see, where I come from is I don't know if I would consider that unethical. I don't even consider, like, let's say if I was to pull up on the side of the road and I was to find roadkill, right? That's been killed
Yeah.
by on the roads. I would think I wouldn't think it's unethical to take bits of that. I wouldn't want to do it because meat grosses me out now that I haven't eaten it in a few years. Really grosses me out. But like cooking bacon, like I had some friends cooking bacon over here once, and it made me feel sick. But the concept of uh the concept of not taking that meat, right, not taking that food, and then opting to eat something else, couldn't someone make the argument that you're causing more waste in the world and you're causing more suffering to animals because obviously
Yeah.
that food needs to come to from somewhere, and the crop deaths of the animals, of like rodents and insects and stuff. So I could even see like the flip side of that, in that it's like not eating that animal, although it makes me feel disgusted, would actually be unethical. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
bizarro world, but it's like sometimes I feel like that's unfortunately where the philosophical endpoints of ethics gets you to, you know?
Well, what you're talking about is a hypothetical situation, doesn't apply to either of our lives. It
Mm,
probably never will, ever.
mm.
And in fact, I would say that everyone watching this, it will probably never, ever apply
Oh,
to their
yeah,
lives
yeah,
either.
of course.
Um,
I would assume that my audience is smart enough to realize to catch on to what we're actually talking about.
yeah,
Like,
no,
would you
I mean to
do you
say that whilst it's a good point, like it's a good philosophical test of logic or moral reasoning, it just wouldn't apply. And I'm just saying that because, like I said before, if this was in replacement of people eating animals, then I'd be for it. I would have no issue. I wouldn't oppose it or protest it in any shape or form. I would be like, yeah, cool. You found a moral loophole in all of this. You
Mm,
want to eat old animals that have died naturally. You haven't killed them. You've given them a good life. You gave them a sanctuary. I can't protest that in any shape
mm.
or form. But um, I guess that's just not going to be the alternative to what people are currently doing to animals. So that's why I have to point out that it is purely a hypothetical, right?
Yeah, I've noticed that in just chatting in Brisbane, that your thought process is very much pragmatic, and that makes sense too because you're an activist. You're like, this shit needs to change. That needs to change now. So like I see that for you, a lot of these questions might be a lot of these like thought experiments and stuff might be like a distraction from the point. And for me, I really enjoy engaging with them. Like another thing I was just going to mention before is I don't think it's I don't think it's unethical to drink piss, right? Like to drink human piss. I would drink human piss if I was on an island, right? To survive, right? But given a cold glass of water, I'm opting for the water every time. The same thing happens when someone says, "Well, if you're on a desert island, would you eat the pig?" For me, I'd probably eat whatever the pig was eating. But let's say the pig was dropped in from a balloon, and the only way I could survive was to kill and eat the pig. I'd
Yeah.
probably do that, right? But I'd also drink my own piss. But once again, given the glass of water, I'd go for the water every time. And I just don't understand when someone makes these arguments. They can choose between a veggie burger or a burger that inherently contains direct suffering to an animal. Why they would ever opt for anything but the veggie burger? Um, like I don't grasp that concept. And just to rant on a little bit more, I remember having a conversation with a young lad that was working with me, and they said, this kid's just out of school. No one's smart at that age. But he said something about like, we should, cows, we kill them for food, right? And that's fine. And I said, okay. And I said, why wouldn't you eat a veggie burger, right, instead of a beef burger? And he said, oh, because I like beef. I like the beef. The taste of beef tastes better. I said, how much better? And I said, twice as good, 3 times as good. And he said, twice as good. And I said, twice as good as the best veggie burger. Okay, cool. I can work with that. No, like I said, let's say we had a hypothetical experiment where we could come up with beef 2.0, and it was like it was a better beef. It was it was twice as tasty as regular beef. But the way they got this beef was by tenderizing the animal while it was still alive. So they just took a baseball bat and just started beating the shit out of a out of a cow, crushing its bones, splitting its organs, like just beating it together but it made the beef burger 2 times as tasty. I said, would you opt for that tastier burger? And he said, no. And I said, why? I said, because it's cruel. I said, okay. And I said, so where's the line between taste pleasure? Like, how much are you willing to give up? Like, but I could see his brain ticking. Like, his brain was like, no, that's cruel. We shouldn't do that for taste. And then I'm like, yeah, I'm like, do I need to spell it out for you? Like, you are doing this for taste. Like, that's what you're currently doing. You're currently saying this burger's twice as good for me, so I don't mind having an animal's throat slit, or for it to live, a tenth its lifespan, or 20th its lifespan. Sorry, a fifth its lifespan. Yeah. So, yeah, it is what it is. So, what would you say to someone who says these animals wouldn't survive in the wild? Therefore,
they're not supposed to. They weren't supposed to be alive to begin with. If people went vegan, these animals would stop being bred. And then we'd be left with a surplus of animals that we could either put into sanctuaries, which is what happens for a lot of lucky animals that come from farms. They are put into sanctuaries. Obviously, it only scratches the surface of how many animals are enslaved, tortured, and murdered. However, we could do that, or there could be one final culling of animals, and then that would be it. There would be no more of these beings being bred into existence. And then if people wanted to eat meat after that point, then they would be forced to hunt or to pay for flesh that has been hunted from wild animals. A lot of people think that these animals are wild, like cows, pigs, chickens, sheep, lambs. Yeah, but they're not. These are animals that have been selectively bred over years and manipulated to the point of absurdity.
Yeah, right. So maybe it's a good time to actually talk about like what got you, like go more in depth about what got you interested in veganism, and how you became a vegan. So you mentioned before that you watched Earthlings and things like that, but could you go into more depth about your journey?
Yeah, sure. Well, initially for me, just sort of started with being super mindful about what I was putting into my body. And this has always been with me for a while now. Like I went through a phase of getting heavily into supplements, and then it was superfoods, and then, wanting to delve deeper into whole foods and going to the farmer's market and getting everything local. And I went down that road of doing everything free range and making sure like, the animals had a good life and all of that, organic and all of that. And then as I started stripping away the layers of conditioning I had around health, I realized that once I became raw, I became a raw foodist for 2 years. And that's when I was only eating raw plant foods, mainly fruit, and lots of vegetable juices and smoothies. And after doing that for a couple of years, I realized at some point, and of course, that speech that I mentioned really helped with this, and these documentaries, that the most profound thing that I had embarked on, that I had sort of realized in my journey of all of this, the most profound aspect of it all was the fact that I was no longer responsible for something I'd been responsible for my whole life. And that something was the greatest form of suffering in our world, the greatest cause of the most brutal and unnecessary cruelty in the world, and the largest and longest standing form of oppression in the world. And when I like got my head around that aspect, I was nothing but compelled to do something about this, and to not just act like I could just bury that information somewhere in the back of my mind and carry on with my life. And I just decided that it was important for me to be a person who contributes to the animal rights movement and furthers the animal rights movement so that it can succeed. I think it's important.
So you started, you're a co-founder, sorry, of Anonymous for the Voiceless. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when I
And
started
I'll
doing activism,
actually show some images I've got up about some of the stuff you guys do, and as you tell the story.
Yeah, so when I started doing activism, I started doing street activism. But it was quite frustrating because it wasn't as effective as I would have liked it to be. I really liked doing outreach, speaking to people directly. I did other forms of activism and even online stuff. So that's in Melbourne, that last photo.
Yeah.
And that's a 16 TV cube. So we've got 16 TVs all showing the footage that we've been referring to throughout this so far. That was a fantastic campaign that we did right out front of Myer and Burke Street Mall. So in that mall, that's where we started AV. And essentially we just wanted to do, and that's in Amsterdam. That's Dam Square. That's a campaign that we did called One Damn Day, where we did that for 24 hours. We occupied the entire square, and that's in the heart of Amsterdam, and we had 800 activists in attendance, and
Wow.
yeah, for 24 hours. So that the cube, what we call the cube of truth, that cube is actually on the smaller side compared to how big it was during the peak. It was humongous. Yeah, it's definitely a proud moment in my activism. So where was I? We wanted to do street activism with footage. That's the crew in Melbourne in the earlier days. Yeah, we wanted to get out there and do a form of activism that made sense, that was more effective, and was a contribution to the animal rights movement, a significant contribution. So we put together the Cube of Truth over the course of 4 or 5 events. We had really cemented this form of activism over the course of 17 events. And that's when we went international under this organization we created called Anonymous for the Voiceless. And it just spread like wildfire. We ended up at our peak in terms of number of chapters. We had 1,011 chapters around the world. Each chapter is a city. So in 1,011 cities, we had these cubes of truth operating. And at the moment, we're sitting at around 450. COVID really impacted our work. And yeah, and it's become the most popular form of street activism in the animal rights movement.
Yeah, I've always said this. I don't know whether or not you'll agree, but I've always said that, the type of vegan activism where you burst into a restaurant screaming that meat is murder feels very much to me like a street preacher outside of a Marilyn Manson concert telling everyone they're going to hell. Like how many people, how many converts does that street preacher get? Now, there may be a time and place to scream at someone that's eating meat, that meat is murder. But I think my background's in marketing. I think in regards to marketing, in regards to like veganism, in regards to pushing the message forward and getting people to think, I think just showing the images and standing silently is actually like a really powerful way to engage with people's like they're interested because of what's going on here. They're not like avoid because I'm getting yelled at. Do you find that most people like do you find that you're actually getting up this is gonna sound weird, but like people who are like literally going, I'm going to become vegan on the spot, like converts almost. Like, are you finding that you're getting like people who are reaching out to you and saying, "Hey, you've changed my mind," or is that happening um, with
Yeah,
your
no
organization?
doubt. The last cube that we did, I was on a live stream. So we do a cube every Saturday in Queensland and in Brisbane, and yeah, the one that we did on Saturday that just passed, there was a girl during my live stream who was, first of all, FaceTiming her mother, showing her the footage on our TVs. And she was telling her mother about how messed up it was. And while I was live, I stood next to her and just started talking to her. And she got off the FaceTime with her mother and then really wanted to talk about it. And she was crying, and she 100% grasped the seriousness of this. And she had never
Mm,
seen footage like this before. She was on her way to McDonald's and then said she declared, even on camera at one point, she was willing to declare that she was going vegan. But this
mm,
does happen. It happens at every cube that I've been to in Brisbane. Uh, pretty much, people declare on the spot that they'll go vegan, or at least they take the issue seriously. When they walk away, they're definitely changed.
mm.
Um, yeah, it's a common occurrence at cubes.
So obviously, when we met, I haven't eaten meat for I don't know 3 years or three or 4 years or something. However, I still occasionally ate cheese, and I wore leather shoes and stuff like that. And part of the reason why I was okay with that at the time was I had some philosophical issues that I had with veganism, um, and with veganism as a whole. And when we met, I was talking about these like philosophical problems that I had, and I realized that I probably, although I still probably hold some of these issues, I was probably doing some form of mental gymnastics to, if I'm being honest with myself, that I didn't realize. I was probably doing some sort of like mental gymnastics to try and um, uh,
Oh,
justify my choices.
right.
Now I'm still not right over to the. I'm still right over to the. I still got problems with the perspective of veganism. Now I don't know whether or not you would call me a vegan with my choices now, because sorry, since we've chatted, I went away, I thought more about my ethics. I bought some books on ethics, interested in the topic, and I thought, do you know what, like it's probably like I'm probably not okay with cheese. So regardless of, this is what I'll get back to, your pragmatism, regardless of like whatever philosophical thing I'm investigating, in the meantime I should probably at least be honest with myself and go, I'm not okay with this. I should stand by I should be integral with my decisions. So I'm definitely not okay with this. These other things I'm thinking about, I can think about them and still not engage in the animal suffering. So that was kind of where I was at. But I wanted to get your perspective on that, on like vegetarianism, and yeah, and the idea of like, do you see vegetarians as allies, or do you see them as like a step in the wrong direction?
Yeah, the latter. um,
Okay.
yeah, I don't see them as allies whatsoever. I, I,
Okay.
I think. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I've made this comparison in the past, but I think it's very profound, so I'll make it again. Those who eat a paleo diet, they don't consume any dairy products. Would we consider those who are eating a paleo diet to be our allies as vegans? Of course not, right?
Mm.
Vegetarians also abstain from one form of animal exploitation and cruelty and suffering, and that is the flesh, which, sure, is more obvious and a more obvious form of animal cruelty. However, we're we're living in a day and age now, it's 2022, where it's easy to look into the cruelty that happens on a dairy farm. In fact, arguably, there's more cruelty happening on a dairy farm, and vegetarians tend to consume more dairy and eggs because they probably believe they need more protein. There's
That's
this
not why I was doing
misconception
it.
that
I was doing it
that
because
is
it
how
was
you're doing it.
delicious. No, that wasn't how I was doing it. It wasn't
Oh, that wasn't
anything to do
okay.
with nutrition. If you look at me, my body type, I'm not a image of health. Like, I'm overweight, and it's because essentially my diet was. I think the best diet you can possibly have is high in high fructose corn syrup, trans fats, sugar, and I'm joking, obviously, but and high processed carbs. I'm joking, obviously, but the idea is, like, I ate a pretty poor diet. So even when I was a vegetarian, we would eat mainly like bready, pastery shit, right? Like, so I was never eating it for protein reasons. I was eating it because I liked the taste.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's the thing. Like, you may consume more dairy and eggs
Yeah, I
in that
probably
time.
did.
Yeah. Well, so even if it's not for the health, like for protein or whatever, many vegetarians do believe that. However, even if it's not for that reason, it just tends to happen that way because you're consuming more, like, I guess, for calories' sake or whatever. But even if it was just the same amount of dairy and eggs as you would consume if you were consuming flesh as well, the point still stands that just from abstaining from one form of animal cruelty doesn't mean that you are an ally of someone who is defending animals with their choices that they have, the power that they have in society, which is veganism, which is the only thing that is really taking a stand for representing animals. So vegetarianism has been illegitimately placed in the same conversation as veganism for far too long. And it's a real problem. And I've gone on record saying that I think it's even bigger of a problem than meat eating because it's created this bootleg version of veganism where people believe that you can be an animal defender without actually having to be one. And
I think I hear what you're saying. Just to totally derail, but do you have any, like, would you consider yourself like a spiritual person, or are you an agnostic atheist, or are you religious at all, or?
I'm not religious, but only because I don't believe that religion is the answer.
Okay.
But I do believe in a God. I don't
Okay.
have a definition for that God or some type of religious context that I can give you, but yeah, I do believe we're connected.
Do you mind if I ask you? Do you mind if I ask a little bit more about that?
Sure.
Do you when you say that you believe in a God, what do you mean?
What do I mean? I mean I believe in like an entity or a source from which we all come from and we all return to.
Okay. So is it more, if you were to, like, to kind of put your God belief in, like, a context, would you say you're more in line with like an Eastern philosophy, like India, Hinduism kind of consciousness, or Western, like traditional Catholicism, Judaism?
I don't know,
Um,
honestly. I was raised Catholic,
oh,
um, but I don't know if from my research of all religions, I just don't gravitate towards any.
okay, interesting. It's interesting to think about, to learn about. So just jumping back onto the vegetarianism, um, the maybe we can just talk about a little bit about why, what thoughts I have around some of the issues I have with veganism, and I'd like to get your perspective. Um, so what do you? So would you say that? Okay, I just want to clarify some definitions. Would you say that eating steak, you're directly paying for a murder of an animal?
Um, what else is happening?
Yeah. Well, I'm just asking. Like,
If
is
yeah, no. Well, my answer to that is if not that, then what are
okay,
you responsible for?
sure. So, would you say when you're eating cheese, you're indirectly responsible for the suffering or the death of an animal?
No, I would say that you are just as directly responsible as you would be if you were to eat flesh.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just about
Okay.
understanding how those industries work. Once you
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
that, you see it. Yeah, it's exactly the same.
So, let's say someone takes a horse riding class, right? And they're
Hmm.
riding a horse, and that horse, obviously, I would assume that you're against horse riding,
I
right?
am.
Yeah. So let's say there's someone takes a horse riding class. Are they directly? Are they indirectly or directly responsible for an animal's death?
Well, that's not as black and white because, and it's not necessarily the death of the horse that makes me opposed to riding horses.
Hmm.
It's just that I think it's fucked up that humans feel entitled to just ride another animal. You know,
Yeah, it is. It is
to
weird.
just like jump on the back of a horse with their 80
Yeah,
kilo plus bodies, well, regardless of how big, how heavy you are.
man.
But
You'll.
it's just insane.
Yeah, no, it is weird to me as well. I have this running theory as well that horse people are the weirdest people. But I'm going to offend a few people with that. But it's just a
That's
joke.
yeah, no, that's
But
interesting. But yeah.
and you'll never convince me that it's never not okay to jump on a rescued elephant and roll around in the water with them, because that is like my dream. I'm not to ride them, obviously, but I'm just saying, like, I would fucking love to roll
No,
around with an elephant.
that sounds yeah, that sounds like fun.
Yeah,
If they were
yeah.
into it and you were just bathing with them in the
Y-
water. No, I
Oh
mean
man,
there are
I
sanctuaries where you can do that in Thailand, where you can just chill
mm,
with them in the water. You can actually clean them as well. You can bathe them.
oh, I love
Um,
that's like my dream.
yeah, you can do it
We
in
were
Thailand.
we were going to do that in Bali, and then we found out that every one of them in Bali are like not, they say they're ethical or whatever, but they're not. They like do rides on the elephants, and and I was like, no, I'm not supporting this. So we didn't do it. But
Yeah,
I've heard that
I can
some
send
in,
you. Yeah, most of them are like that. I can send you one I know of in Chiang Mai, Thailand, where
oh,
they are ethical.
it's just, yeah, it'd be so awesome. But in regards to, just to get just get back getting distracted, obviously this beer is taking effect. The One of the things that I am curious about, though, is, would you say that any unnecessary like food choices that we make that
Hmm.
cause suffering to animals is immoral, or is that something you have to think about?
Um, I think I know where you're going with this, and you know, when the question is asked like that, I have to say yes. I do think that that is immoral. However, um, my goal is very specific, and it's to end the industries that are exploiting animals, that are enslaving them, that are breeding them into existence, that are tormenting them and murdering them in slaughterhouses, and also these industries that test on animals and exploit them for entertainment, like circuses and aquariums um, and like SeaWorld and shit like that, and these other industries that exploit animals to then turn them into clothing. So they're the industries that I am out to end. So when we talk about the suffering that occurs with crop farming, while it pales in comparison, and it really does, yes, there is some suffering involved because it's not a perfect system, and like a perfect utopia is not even on the cards. So there's no point of even trying to discuss that because it's not an option. Like, we can't opt for that in our society.
Yeah, of course. Well, so just to clarify, because I think we discussed this briefly in Brisbane, but just to clarify for the audience, a big issue that I currently have with like the ethics of what I was talking about my purchasing choices. Like, do I support child labor in my clothing choices and stuff? Like these kind of high level like thoughts, right? So the thoughts that I was having were the thoughts that I'm having at the moment are: couldn't someone make the argument that anything over any like pleasurable food that's over the threshold of like what you need to survive? This is also assuming that we should give a shit about survival. But obviously, let's grant that, because I don't think no one's getting on board on something where you just starve yourself to death. But let's say we grant that we should survive in this hypothetical. Wouldn't it be immoral to order the vegan cheesecake? Like,
You mean to
what
eat more
purpose?
calories than you require
Yeah,
to survive and thrive? Yeah,
yeah,
well,
because like obviously like that vegan cheesecake has like, even if you just if you remove all the crop farming and you just count the truck driving the flour to the bakery and adding that little bit of pollution to the air that screws up something, or insects that get hit on the road, you're contributing a little bit for only taste pleasure. And I
yeah.
feel like vegans' arguments are similar to that. That
Well,
that they
it's
say it's unnecessary.
yeah. No, I see your point. However, I think that's something that we ought to address once we address being vegan. So using that as an excuse to continue not being vegan is unjustified,
Oh
right? Well,
yeah.
vegans ordered the cheesecake. That's not a reason to not be vegan. That's completely
Yeah. Piers
that's
Morgan.
completely yeah, exactly. It's just looking for the cop out excuse that enables you to continue sleeping well at night. The narrative that you tell yourself that everything is okay and there's nothing to be concerned with because vegans are hypocrites. Ordering an extra cheesecake doesn't make us hypocrites, because if we're talking about only eating within your caloric requirements, you're also talking about living within your lifestyle requirements. And then you're really talking about like a communist regime that's
It's,
extreme,
it's not
where
even that.
people
It's
can
it's
only
like it's like, yeah, you can, the problem with it is you can draw it out to infinity, right? Like you can just keep going, like you can, until eventually you're not even moving for the sake of the microbes that live on your skin. And does that make sense?
yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah,
I
but
know.
I
Yeah.
like what I want to say is that I feel that it's not productive to talk about like how many cars we should own, how many items of clothing we should own, and if
Mm-hmm.
we own more than whatever number we put on that, then we're immoral. Um, how about we just stop being responsible for the greatest form of suffering on the planet at the moment, and then we can
Mm-hmm.
address these other issues in society that can help to reduce suffering even further. But the
Mm.
greatest form of suffering, without a doubt, is what's happening in slaughterhouses, is what's happening in these labs, what's happening on leather farms, what's happening in all those industries that I've mentioned. Excuse me, this beer has got me groggy.
No, that's all right. I actually agree with you, and I'm glad that you said that, because I think that that is true for any type of any type of activism in this space. And I would actually push back a little bit about you see, about your take on vegetarianism. You see, I think that being a vegetarian today is probably probably not too radical. Like, I mean, we have like amazing options for most things, right? Like, vegan cheese has still got a little way to go, but in regards to like vegan, you can get most things vegan, right? But vegetarians can get like Beyond Burgers and stuff. It's really easy to be a vegetarian. It's a little bit harder to be a vegan, but it's still, today. In the 80s, it was really hard to be a vegan, like compared to what it is today. Not hard, not undoable, but it's harder, right? So, like, Animal Liberation, when it first came out, the book by Peter Singer in 1975, that book doesn't advocate for veganism. It advocates for vegetarianism. And it was
Mm.
radical. It was a radical, like, push forward at the time, and is
Mm-hmm.
responsible for most of the animal rights movements of today.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think is interesting is we should, well, you might disagree, but let me get this thought out, and then you can disagree. But
Sure.
I think, and I hope that people in 50 years from now, because that is literally 50 years ago, roughly, I hope they look back at this conversation and call you immoral and Animals for the Voiceless immoral for saying that. I hope that we've gotten so far in our animal ethics and our ethics on like how we treat the planet, that even the idea that there can be crop deaths and we'll be okay with it is seen as like, that's obviously not vegan 2.0. You got to be vegan 2.0. I hope that society keeps getting better and we keep
Yeah,
moving
yeah.
towards the right.
I agree with you,
Yeah.
man. I agree with
Mm.
you. Yeah, and with Anonymous for the Voiceless it operates within the temperament of our time,
Yeah, of
about
course. Yeah.
of the times we live in, right? Um, Again, back to being pragmatic. But even Martin Luther King is quoted for saying that something along the lines of veganism being the only path that makes sense. Um, so whilst he was tackling the issue of black rights, he knew about animal rights, and he understood that that was the path that we have to go in. Ending slavery for one group of beings has to happen, but it also has to happen, obviously, for all groups of beings. Um, and animals have been enslaved the longest, and they're enslaved by, in terms of quantity, in terms of numbers, they're enslaved by numbers we can't even wrap our heads around. Over 3 trillion per year. So,
Wait,
um,
is that
but
3 trillion animals that are killed every year? Or
yeah, enslaved, tortured, and murdered. So there's over 80 billion land animals, and something to the figure of 2.3 trillion um, at, and this is a conservative estimate, marine animals that are usually they're either so. they're either farmed, like factory farmed, or they're wild caught. But these are old figures, and this increases per year, which makes veganism all the more urgent and a moral obligation. So when I say 3 trillion per year, 3 trillion individuals, that's a conservative number. It's probably a lot more than that.
So just looking it up now, because I knew the numbers were high, but I didn't realize they were this high. Apparently, 150 species are going extinct every day. Every day. That's like 150 to 200. That's including birds and plants and insects and stuff, though.
Yeah, that's from the
But
habitat destruction due to
yeah, so
farming. Yeah.
yeah, and the thing that I want to drive home is is it something like we use 8 times as much crop space? Like if we if we weren't to feed livestock, if we weren't to grow livestock, we would need 8 times as less crop space. Is that right? Is that
Yeah,
figure right?
that's
Yeah.
about right. It's about right. I mean, it could differ slightly. It could be 6 times, but the point is that it's substantially more land space that is used for the act of eating animals versus eating plant foods directly.
So
And this is why I think, like addressing, vegans eating the cheesecake that they don't really need to eat is, I think, while it's an interesting next step that we ought to look at, I think plant farming generally needs to be looked at. Is there better ways to farm plants? And the answer is obviously yes, there's got to be better ways. And I think veganic farming is probably the future. Veganic reduces the amount of suffering in agriculture, I think, to the greatest extent. But maybe vertical farming might be also an answer to reducing suffering. But I think we need to address one thing at a time, and the most urgent thing that is right in front of us, that is causing the greatest form of suffering, that we can all easily participate in ending every single day, 3 times a day. You might eat more than 3 times a day. You get my point. Is being vegan. No longer voting with your dollar, voting with your actions, your choices, to be an animal abuser. No longer being a part of that system of suffering and death.
I will say it is a really nice feeling to cook up like a meal that is just like awesome, like a delicious meal, and then being like, you know what, there was like no suffering that went involved in this besides like to a reasonable extent, obviously talking about rodents and stuff, but like there wasn't a cow being milked, there wasn't a pig getting its throat slit. This is just, and it's good, it tastes good, and there are ways to do it, and there are like vegan food can be really delicious. Like I know that you go to a pub and you order a vegan burger and it's the worst thing you'll ever have, but like there are really really good options, vegan food.
Yeah, well,
But
see, the thing is, I have to say, it depends on which pub you go to. Obviously, you're talking about perhaps some of the experiences you've had, and I tend to agree that a lot of pubs don't have a good vegan option. But there's been so many instances where I found myself at a random pub. I drove with Asal from LA all the way to Colorado to Denver. And when we got to Colorado finally, after driving through Utah, and it was a beautiful drive, by the way, but then when we got to Colorado, we ended up at this hole-in-the-wall pub, and they were showing the Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz fight. I think it was the second fight. I can't remember. Maybe it was the first. No, it was definitely the second. Anyway, beside the point, we got there because we looked up online that they sold these Impossible Burger sliders. And we're like, what the hell? And this random regional town,
That's cool.
and we go in there and we get these Impossible sliders, and they were delicious, man. They were so on
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
And we were just sitting there watching the UFC with the nicest people ever. And yeah, many
It,
instances like that have impressed.
yeah, there's to be honest, for the most part, it is unless you're going to someone that knows how to cook vegan, it's usually dog shit, in my opinion. But the other night, I did have that experience at Pomona Distillery on the Sunshine Coast, or around about the Sunshine Coast, and most things on the menu are like burger, meat, burgers, ribs, and all that stuff. And I ordered the like some like curry, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be garbage. Like it's just gonna be frozen like slop. It was so good. It was one of the best vegan meals I've had in so long. And I was like, how did this happen? Like what? I think people are getting more savvy when it comes to vegan cooking. I think it's becoming much more popular, and as a result,
Yeah,
yeah, you get better options.
no doubt.
I have two more things I want to do with you. I got some questions from the audience, and be kind, because these people have obviously never thought about these are like grade 2 level questions, right? And then I'm
Okay.
gonna have and then I'm gonna rapid fire you some questions, okay? So the first question is they're not all bad, but they're not all like uninformed, but how can we measure if animals feel suffering as much as we would in a slaughterhouse?
I don't think that they need to suffer exactly like we do in order for the obligation to be vegan to be substantial, for it to be um, real.
Mm.
I think they just need to simply suffer in ways that are comparable to how we would suffer. And I
Mm.
think that they do in all of the ways that matter the most.
Yeah, I would like to push back on that a little bit as well, in that even if it was not as much suffering, doesn't matter. But let's say we did find some specific gene they have that meant that they would suffer more, which is possible. Maybe not with genes, but it's possible that they could suffer more emotionally, physically. Would this person change their eating habits?
Yeah,
And
right.
I'd want to ask that person, like, okay, let's say they suffered more. Would that,
Mm-hmm.
like, we discovered it? Would that because I think this is a diversion. This question is a
Yeah,
diversion.
I agree with you, and again, like what you just said, plays right into pragmatism and being practical, and so I of course favor that, and I agree that that's exactly what the response ought to be to that type of question. There was a activist who joined the Cube 2 or 3 weeks ago, who said to me that she had been learning about more about the animal science of suffering, and she pointed out that when insects are on the skins of animals, they flinch a lot, especially horses. They flinch a lot around that area of their bodies when there are flies and other insects, and they flinch like crazy. And our skin doesn't do that. And she said because of that, they actually have a higher level of sensitivity and a higher level, like that's one indication of them having more
Mm,
feelings than we do, than we have the capacity to. And so therefore, there was this deduction that they would actually potentially suffer worse than we would if we were
mm,
in their position. And I've also heard about marine animals, certain marine animals like lobsters. They don't have the capacity to switch off when they're suffering like we do. So, when you hit your knee on a hard surface, initially, like, ouch, that really hurts, but you don't really feel it till like 2 or 3 days later, when you're like completely swollen and you're bruised up and you really have to like recover. You have to spend time recovering and rehabilitating. Whereas with a lot of these marine animals like lobsters, they don't have that separation. They just feel everything immediately. So yeah, there is an equal amount of capacity, at least, for the argument to be made. that they feel more than we do.
There's also the argument too. I heard Cosmic Skeptic make this argument. Not make this argument, but he said he came to the realization that even emotionally, these animals could be evolutionarily wired to experience certain emotions and certain physical pains much worse. And he said
Much
that
more
that made
intensely.
he said that it made him sick to the stomach, to realize that, like, imagine yourself in a gas chamber struggling for air, or imagine yourself upside down with your throat being slit, or going to a slaughterhouse knowing you're going to die. Imagine what you're going through there, and then imagine that it's possible these other animals feel it worse. And if you've ever looked into the eyes of a pig or a cow in the footage of these trucks that are going to the slaughterhouse, you can see they know something's up, and they know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
it's kind
certainly
of
do.
fucked up to talk about.
No, it's I've had many moments where I've just sat and cried over the thought of like being a cow, for example. One instance I can recall right now is where I imagine being a cow, being on the truck, getting off, walking down the kill line, seeing other members of my own species being murdered in front of me, or even just hearing and knowing about it, because they clearly know what's up. Like, they're not that stupid.
They might not know what's up, but they definitely know something's up. You know what I mean? They definitely know something's not
They know
right here.
something's not right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then, you know, imagining like going through that process of being slaughtered, being murdered. It's so fucking sad and horrific. But
Now that cows are domesticated, wouldn't they suffer in the wild if we were to just become vegan? If the world was to become
well,
vegan
that's
overnight?
not the. So again, that's not the scenario we're in at the moment. You know, when we're not all going to become vegan overnight. The viewers of this podcast will hopefully become vegan, but that will only make a small dent on the entire industry. It won't make much of an impact on the entire industry, but at least it won't be happening because of you anymore. You will no longer be the reason that animals are subjected to unimaginable torture and murder. By you becoming vegan, animals aren't sent into the wild. The way that it works is you no longer demand what's happening in these industries. Therefore, if anything, animals are no longer bred for you. They're not bred into existence to begin with. So there aren't any of these beings around for us to then decide where they're going to be sent. Is it a sanctuary? Are we rewilding them? So again, back to pragmatism and actual reality of the situation. This isn't the situation we're in, so we don't need to worry about that. We could possibly worry about that once we get to the point where these industries are abolished. Then we have like this surplus of animals that have already been bred into existence. Then what do we do with them? Do we put them in sanctuaries? Do we rewild them? We can get to that bridge when we cross it.
It's probably not going to happen because, like, if the world started to go vegan, I'm sure, like, well, it is. The world is already starting to go vegan, but at the rates that things are catching on, and they're catching on exponentially fast. But let's say they continue to do this, like, we just stop breeding these animals into existence, and then like, it's unfortunate, like the cows that we still have will probably be murdered, which is unfortunate, but when there's not going to be this, like, okay, cut the fence, let the cows roam out into the forest and just see how they go. It's not like that at all. Have you got any, like, stories from the streets where, like you've had, like, douchebags come up eating, like, snakes and stuff, or like do you have any moments like that where you've been, like, assaulted or something, like, by someone? Like, have you got any, like, war stories from your activism?
Yeah, there's been some assaults.
Why is someone assaulting you? Like, that's
Because it's not, the truth is not a bowl of cherries. The truth can be very uncomfortable and confronting to deal with. and especially in this case, it's not something that people just leisurely face. They are going to be faced with an ugly, ugly part of themselves that they've subscribed to through social norms, which completely corrupts their own individual values. Because most people will say they're against animal cruelty, but then when they see us, they're like, oh, actually, I'm responsible for what they're showing, which is the worst form of animal cruelty that you can even imagine. What could you imagine doing worse to an animal than what we're showing you on our screens?
Yeah.
But when we say, are you against animal cruelty? To people, 100% of people say yes, right? And it's because we, of course, would like to say that that's the position we hold. We're against animal cruelty. Of course, we're anti-animal abuse. You know, literally everybody says that, and even hunters say that. Even hunters will say that. They'll say, and like they're the ones going out there and facing the act of killing animals. They don't think that shooting a bullet through someone's brain is an act of abuse. They don't think that that's animal abuse. That's not an act of if that's not an act of abuse, how is punching someone an act of abuse? Like, it's just it's a crazy bastardization of the human language in order to face the ugliness that we represent. Anyway, my point that I was trying to make is that in these instances where they've assaulted us, so in one instance I can think of right now, it was in Melbourne where these two guys had stopped. They looked at it and they were looking pretty angry at the time. They were looking at the clip. And I walked up to them and I said, would you like to know more about why we're here? Or something like that. And he said to me, no, I think you guys are dickheads. And I said, all right, cool. And I just went to walk off because I have zero interest in engaging with anyone. If they're not reachable. I just don't, that's not what I'm there for. I'm an animal rights activist. I'm not going to waste my fucking time trying to get through to someone who's got their mind made up about this. So anyway, I tried to walk off and he started talking shit while I was walking away. And one of my activist, I guess you could say colleagues, talk shit back. And I was like, no, you don't need to do that. Like, we don't need to do that. Just let it be. Let them walk the fuck off. And he's like, oh, like, I forget what he even said, but it was very, you know, he was like provoking some kind of physical altercation with him. So he then came over and they wanted to punch on, and then there were a few blows exchanged, and then they fucked off, and that was the end of the story. Usually people troll and they can be pretty aggressive and they yell and scream. But they usually just troll with memes that they've seen on the internet. Like, oh, you guys are vegan. Oh, do you drink water? Well, that's where fish live. So
that's a fish's house, bro.
Yeah. It's just like they're speaking memes. And I swear, man, I was just thinking about this today. I feel like the way our language is going, the way we speak to each other and the way we communicate, it is going in the direction of just talking in memes to each other.
Yeah. It truly is. Like, I think even Apple, when they did their release, they said they know they were making a joke. They said they know they're responsible for the decline of the English language, but they made it so when you clicked on emojis, it like gave you options to like click all the words and just change them to emojis. And they said, we know that it's gonna like the next generation is fucked, but like, yeah, like they're talking memes. Oh geez. Okay, well, I actually have a fun little experiment for you. Now, I'm sure that you've heard a million of these memes over the course, memes or ideas over the course of your activism in the last 9 years, 5 years or 9 years, sorry. What was it? How many years have you been in activism?
6 or 7 I've been doing
6
activism.
or 7, okay. So this is a website called yourveganfallacyis.com. And it just lists a bunch of like common fallacies when it comes to people eating meat or trying to justify their eating of meats. Excuse me. So I just wanted to rapid fire these out and for you to give like the quickest rapid fire answers you can on each one of these things.
Sure.
Do you reckon you're up for the challenge?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Okay. All right. Cool. First one: animals are not intelligent enough to matter.
Yeah, so like what is intelligent enough to matter? Some humans don't have any kind of intelligent capacity that we would deem to be comparable to a normal person in society. Does that then justify causing cruelty and suffering to those individuals?
Yeah, I like to think of it as like the trait equalized human. So if like there was a human that had the intelligence of a pig, would it be okay to gas them in a chamber and then eat their flesh? Probably
Right,
not.
yeah.
Animals eat other animals too, so I will.
Yeah, well, other animals do a lot of things that we don't do, and so why are we picking and choosing only certain activities that other animals engage in? The same
Yeah.
animals that people like to point to use as excuses for not being vegan also do things like sniff each other's asses, they rape, they kill and eat babies of their own species. And so, if you were to do any of those things, you would be seen as an insane person in the current constructs we have in society. So it's pure hypocrisy to say that just because they engage in killing and eating each other, that we are then allowed to do that morally. Makes no sense.
Canine teeth make me a meat eater.
Canine teeth. In fact, it's interesting because hippos have the largest canine teeth of any animal, and they're
Okay.
herbivores. They're herbivores. So hippos have huge canine teeth in order to scare away predators who might try and kill them. Um, but just because nature gives you a certain tooth size doesn't mean you have to go and act out violent acts with those. Um, I don't even think that human canines are even that significant for us to act like they're designed for chewing and biting through flesh. So
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't even think that that's a significant argument on a biological level. But even if we did have so-called canines that were designed to eat flesh, doesn't mean we need to. Doesn't mean we need to
Yeah.
do anything of the sort. We can decide what we should engage in, and being vegan is perfectly adequate and healthy to survive and thrive. Period.
This one is eating meat is my personal choice, but I want to preface this. Pause. I messaged my office, like where I work today, and I said, I said this to a bunch of people too. I'm interviewing a vegan activist tonight. This is your chance to hit him with a earth-shattering philosophical question that will pull apart veganism at the seams. And I said, his argument will be humanity has a moral obligation to be vegan. Okay. The responses I
Okay.
got from people: KFC though, but meat tastes good. End of discussion. And so, yeah, that fits into the eating meat is my personal choice. So, what would you say to these people?
I mean, murdering humans is also a personal choice, and I'm not disagreeing that it's a personal choice, but
Yeah.
the mere fact that it is a personal choice doesn't absolve you from moral obligations.
Cool. So, they would normally go to humans are different because, and this is the next one, I'm on top of the food chain. Humans.
Yeah, so being top of the food chain is, if anything, it requires more of a responsibility on our part in the way that we carry ourselves. So we have a responsibility, ideally, to protect other species with this power that we have. Top of the food chain is also it's an aggrandized, arbitrary label that we place on ourselves as human beings. If you place a human being and a lion in the same room with no weapons, a lion is going to fuck you up. So when you bring tools into the situation like guns, then humans become more dominant. But again, just because you have the power to dominate over another species doesn't necessarily mean you need to act out that domination with violence, when you can just simply assess the situation and decide to act with responsibility and integrity. You could then otherwise, like in this situation, we're talking about cows and pigs and chickens and turkeys and fish. These animals have done nothing to cause any type of threat to us or to harm us in any type of way. And we have a perfectly adequate option to just leave them alone. And so if we are at the top of the food chain, then surely we have a greater responsibility to act with integrity in accordance to those animals and leave them alone.
I only eat humane meat.
Yeah, humane is a label that is placed on these, like the word humane means to show benevolence or compassion. There's nothing benevolent or compassionate about murdering an animal unnecessarily, and factory farms and farms in general, the whole process which we've already gotten into throughout this video. There's nothing humane about that. The word humane is placed as a label across that to distort the reality of what's happening. So it's just a lie that humans tell themselves.
Our early ancestors ate meat.
They did a lot of things. They raped and killed each other. There was horrendous things happening throughout the lives of our ancestors.
And you're not making a pro-rape. And you're not making a pro-rape argument, I'm assuming, right?
How do you mean?
Like I was just saying, because like I was saying the argument is our ancestors ate meat, and you said, they also raped people. And I'm like, oh, so you're not making a pro-rape argument. Like that's like the joke. It is a joke.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, I get the
Yeah.
humor now. But yeah, it's clear that they were doing a lot of different fucked up things. The whole point of ancestry is that we're to evolve. Like if we're supposed to evolve, then we're supposed to look at what our ancestors did and look at how we can improve. Right.
Yeah. I do not need to be vegan to love animals.
You don't need to. Love doesn't even need to come into the equation at all whatsoever. You can hate another human being. Doesn't give you a right to kill them.
Interesting. That's a really good point. Plants are also alive.
They're alive. They're intelligent. Doesn't mean they're sentient. Huge difference. They don't have a brain, no central nervous system. That means they don't experience life in the same way that a sentient being does.
Yeah, so they don't experience life. Yeah, that's a good
But
point.
even if someone was to convince me or any vegan that plants suffer in a comparable way to animals, then you're still making the case for veganism, because vegans consume the least amount of plants.
Yeah. Vegans cannot get enough iron.
It's just completely incorrect.
Yeah.
Right? There's no vegan specific disease that even exists. Oh, B12 deficiency, iron deficiency, that exists within all humans. Right? More non-vegans are anemic, iron deficient, than vegans. So why do vegans get slapped with this iron deficiency story?
Because
it's an excuse.
Yeah,
it's an excuse.
I think the only diet in the world that's been proven to stop, like, arrest and reverse heart disease is a whole food plant-based diet.
Yeah, exactly.
No other diet in the world. Yeah. The only diet in the world to reverse our number one killer, or stop our number one killer, heart disease, is a whole food plant-based diet. Like, that's pretty.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we'll actually end the interview there. However, I do want to ask one final thing, and that is, do you have any recommendations for where people can go to learn more about like vegan food they can make, or vegan recipes, vegan, like how to become vegan if they wanted to?
I'd recommend going to cubeoftruth.com.
Mm-hmm.
Cubeoftruth.com has some resources like a Reddit link, which shows you how to find recipes through Reddit. There's a lot of recipes that are shared on Reddit. You can also just use Google. To be quite frank, it's the easiest thing in the world to do and research through Google. Just type in whatever your favorite recipe is and then search for a vegan option.
Thank you, Paul Bashir, for coming on the Deep Drinks podcast. It's been a very interesting conversation. It's nice to be drunk on a Friday night as opposed to like a Saturday morning, which is not normally, when I do these podcasts. And thanks again for coming on. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, well,
cool.
links in the description for anyone who wants to check out your stuff, and obviously all your resources that you mentioned as well.
Yeah, cool, man.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me.